Good morning, BookTube, YouTube. This is Johnny. I thought I'd make a video since it's been a couple of days and it's a Sunday and my wife has gone off to church and I'm sitting here in the dining room, which is my habit. It's kind of like my office. So I'm waking up to another Sunday. It is July the 6th, 2025. It is 8:55 in the morning. Yeah, I'm waking up, writing in my paper diary. I'm on page 567 for the year 2025. Yeah, to me I said to my wife last night, here, I write in my diary, I write down the page number, the date, the time, and then I put this in my folder, my July 2025 folder. And then at the end of the month, I'll take it downstairs and put it into a bin and I'll never see it again or read it. So why do I do it? Well, you get certain kind of habits. It's like you get up in the morning, you have a cup of coffee or a cup of tea or a glass of water, and you just, there's certain habits that you just repeat. It's just how life is. And I'll write until I can't write anymore, until I lose my marbles. No one knows. But so I write, and I thought, I mentioned in my last video I might do a to be read, what I'll be reading in the month of July 2025, and I've been pretty consistent. For many years I would just read all over the place. I would just read, and then I would read something for a couple of weeks, and then I put it away, and then I wouldn't read it, and I go on to something else. But I've been trying to read the same books consistently, and not just reading and then putting them aside, but trying to finish them. And I've been pretty, last couple of years, I've been reading especially novels to the end, which is unusual. But as you know, as I repeat myself in these videos, I'm retired, I'm an old man, and I'm going to be 73 next month. August 14th, 1952, I was born in Oakland, California. Even though I lived all over the place. I've lived all over, but now we live here in Holland, Michigan. My wife grew up here in Holland, Michigan. That's why we live here. This is where her family, her uncles and aunts and nieces and cousins and people all live. But anyway, I'm going to be rambling. As you know, my habit in the morning, I read Christian books in the morning. I'm a Christian. I'm united to Christ and saving faith. I have the hope of eternal life. I glory in the cross of Christ, and I've been washed in the blood of the Lamb, and I'm marching up to Zion, things like that. But yeah, that's one thing I was thinking about before I start making this video. I was talking about last time about always speaking the truth in love and being aware of your language, being aware of what you say to people, what you think, how you verbalize your existence in this crazy world. Now, I haven't always practiced this or really lived this way, but I would say today, July the 6th, 2025, I'm very conscious of the fact that I live in the presence of God, a holy God, a God who hates sin, a God who will judge the living and the dead. And if you live that way, it does govern your speech. It does govern your actions, how you live each day. Now, being retired, I don't have I don't have to go off to work. I don't have to, our kids are all raised and married and have children, but I'm very conscious that I'm living each day in the presence of God, and so I'm always very introspective. I'm always examining myself. I'm very self-knowledge, self-consciousness. And so as you live in the presence of God, and you know He's a God that you will have to give an account for on the day of judgment, you live a certain way. And you live in the light of the Bible. You read scriptures, and so that's why, now this morning we didn't have time to read the Bible this morning, my wife and I got up, she was leaving for church, but we seek to read the Bible, study the Bible, and read books about the Bible. And so what I've been reading in the mornings, the life of Christ, and I told you I'm reading the same things over and over again. So this is the life of Christ, Volume 1 by Ludolph the Carthusian, translated by Victor Coetzee. And so I've been reading this. Now I read this morning, and then I read this yesterday I read Christ's Prayer Before His Passion, Volume 2, Expository Sermons on John 17. So I read these, and then I also been reading, since at night, my wife and I, we read through the prophecy of Jeremiah in the Old Testament. So I got these out, the book of Jeremiah, the Bible in medieval tradition, translated and edited by Joy A. Schroeder, and then I read Jeremiah, the Reformation commentary on Jeremiah. Now I told you I'm not going to read these from cover to cover. I'm just reading it, but these I do plan to read cover to cover. This is Volume 2. I've read Volume 1. As I mentioned, there was an edition of the Life of Christ published a couple of years ago in 4 volumes, which I read. This is a reader's edition. This is a different edition, different translation, different format, so I'm reading this. And then in the mornings, my wife and I, we're reading through the New Testament. We're in 2 Corinthians, and then we read the New Testament, and then we read the Valley of Vision, a collection of Puritan prayers and devotions. So I read those in the mornings, pretty generally. Now, I have to confess that in the morning, sometimes I'm kind of bummed out, I'm kind of lethargic, I'm kind of just exhausted, burnt out, ready to, I just sit in the living room and just veg. But generally, this is what I read in the mornings. As I'm writing in my paper diary and talking to my wife, and I mess with the computer in the mornings, I watch BookTube, I look at the news, check the email, and things like that. But in the afternoons, I try to read nonfiction. So as far as nonfiction, I mentioned this, I go through, what I do is I have a pile here. See, these are a pile of nonfiction. Now, I'll read this next. This is probably, now I'm not sure, but today I'll probably read Square Haunting, 5 Writers in London Between the Wars by Francisca Wade, and reading the essay The Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. Now this is what I have to read next in the stack of nonfiction. And then after I read the next day, I'll read Bright Circle, 5 Remarkable Women in the Age of Transcendentalism. I'm almost finished with these books. I'm starting the next one. I start reading this probably maybe Monday or Tuesday, I'll be reading on Margaret Fuller. The Tempest of Margaret Fuller is what the next chapter is. As you know, I've read 2 biographies on Margaret Fuller over the years. And then the next day, probably Wednesday, I'll be reading Capitalism and Its Critics, A History from Industrial Revolution to AI by John Cassidy. Yeah, I recommend this book. I've been reading it in sequence. And then I read this Free Speech, A History from Socrates to Social Media by Jacob Hammer. I'm almost finished with this. I got one more chapter in this. And then I'm going to read something else, another nonfiction, or I might just stick with these and try to finish these. And then I also read this week, well last week, Tripping Utopia, Margaret Mead, The Cold War, The Troubled Birth of Psychedelic Science by Benjamin Breen. So I read this week, that's why it's on the bottom, and then I read this, Free Speech, and then I read this week or last week, Capitalism and Its Critics, and then I'll read this week, Bright Circle. I find towards the end of the week I'll get back to those piles, and then, but the next one on the top is Square Haunting, and I'm on Virginia Woolf in this volume, and I'm reading Virginia Woolf. Now, sometimes I'll take a break from these in the afternoons, and I'll read an essay by J. M. Coetzee, late essays, 2006 to 2017, and then I'm almost finished with these letters with John Asher, Here and Now letters, 2008 to 2011. These, so I read these. So that's my nonfiction. That's what I generally read. Now in the afternoons I get kind of lethargic and I kind of doze and I look at the computer. I go outside and I water. It's been really hot, so I go outside in the late afternoon, early evening, and I water my wildflower garden, or I sit outside in the driveway, and if it's cool out, it's been very hot and humid, so I haven't been sitting out. And I'll read something like this. Now, when it comes to literary fiction, I'm almost done reading the Terrestrials by Paul West. I'm almost done with this. I'm not sure what literary fiction I'm going to read next. I have many possibilities. I have 4 New York Review books coming in the mail on the 10th of July. And I might read one of those, or I might read something else. I'm not really sure, but I've been reading this. And then in the evenings, also, I've been reading Patrick White's Flaws in the Glass, a Self-Portrait, a little memoir. I'm almost done with this. I just read this. Sometimes I don't read literary fiction before I go to bed. I'll read Patrick White's Self-Portrait, or I've been reading Patrick White, A Life by David Marr. So I've been reading these. I usually in the evenings, this is what I read. But usually I try to read literary fiction, but in reading this biography of Patrick White by David Marr, it's very literary. It's very, it's like novelistic, you might say. I've really been enjoying reading this, and reading this, The Flaw in the Glass. As far as the Terrestrials, I told you it's about 2 pilots, elite pilots, who fly a spy plane, and it crashes someplace in a desert in Africa, and they go through this. Both of them are separated when they eject out of their plane. One lands on a mountain cliff, and one lands in the desert in a big lake that is being harvested by tribes who use the lake. It has salt, and they go through these ordeals, but they're rescued, and then they go through different adventures, and then they wind up being traded back to the United States government, and then they're sent to some kind of military base, and they're interrogated, and then they're like in their 40s, and they spend their whole lives flying jets and planes in the military, and they wind up on this. It's almost like a resort or a place for military men to recuperate from whatever. And then these two guys, Clegg and his name is Booth, they escape from this place, and they don't realize the government knows that they're going to leave, and because they've been tracking them, and then but most of the novel is just Clegg. His name is Clegg. It's mostly his mind and all the thoughts and thinking. There's not much movement or much plot or narrative in the book. It's mostly a lot of verbalage, a lot of history of aviation and planes and technology about planes and flying, but then they wind up leaving this place, and the government knows, and then they think they're being followed or they're going to get arrested, but no, they wind up at this hotel, and in the morning they get up and they have from Express there's 2 packages for them, and the government has sent them all their papers and all their documents and sent them $1,000 in cash and their credit cards, and basically the government has said you're free to do what you want to do. So these are 2 men who spent their whole lives basically flying supersonic jets, and what are they going to do? Well, they wind up buying and mortgaging an old airfield, for tourist area up in the Twin Lakes, and flying. They buy an old plane and flying tourists into these resort area. So it's something like that. It's kind of slow moving, a lot of verbalage. I don't know. I've been reading it and I'm going to finish it, but I don't know. Sometimes I don't know why I read certain things, but it's not hard on my mind. Something that you can read at night or in the evenings, and it's somewhat interesting, but it's not for everyone. So I've been reading that, Terrestrials. I have 2 other novels of his that I can choose from after I finish this, and I'm not sure if I'm going to read another one. So, yeah, I still got this cold. Mostly it's in my throat. It could be allergies, I don't know. So that's what I've been reading. So yeah, I've just gone through the days. It's a new week. It's a Sunday. I'm just trying to get a perspective on life. How am I to live in this world? How am I to accept what's going on in our country? I'm really struggling. Tomorrow I have an appointment with my psychologist, which basically we just sit and talk. As you know, I can sit here, if this camera didn't shut off in 30 minutes or 28 minutes, I could talk to you guys for an hour and a half or even an hour. I could ramble. And that's what I do when I go see my psychologist. I bring a book, and he said, "What are you reading?" And then I talk about what I'm reading, and then we say, "Well, how are you doing? How are you feeling?" And then I share some thoughts, and sessions usually last about 45 minutes, and then I'm gone. That's it. And then I'll see him another 4 weeks. It's been 5 weeks since I've seen him, my psychologist, Jim, because I got sick last week and I canceled my appointment. So it's been 5 weeks, usually every 4 weeks. And so yeah, if we ran into each other at a thrift store or a library used book sale, and I start talking to you guys, I would just ramble. And then you probably start looking at your watch and say, "Hey, this old guy is really, I gotta get out of here." And that's the same problem I had when I would go to church. That'd be the same problem. When I would go to church, I always had a book with me. I had a little briefcase kind of thing, and people knew I was a reader, a bookworm, and some would ask me, not always. And then I start talking about what I'm reading, and then they'd start saying, "Hey, I gotta get out of here. I gotta go home and eat my roast beef." And people didn't really want to talk, and they didn't know what I was talking about. And people who are bookworms, people who are into literature, who are into books or into some subject like systematic theology or postmodernism, or they talk about a writer, Australian writer, Patrick White, and you start talking about his life and his literature and his books and all that he went through. Most people don't even know who Patrick White is. I was talking to a guy just recently at a thrift store. I ran into this guy at a thrift store who I know is a book dealer. He sells books online. And I start mentioning all these different writers, like Saul Bellows, Philip Roth, Joyce Carol Oates, Iris Murdoch, Richard Risco, Richard Price, just goes on. And he did not know a single one of them. Didn't know who Jack Kerouac was. He didn't know who Allen Ginsberg was. He didn't know nothing about beat literature. He knew nothing about abstract painters or pop art like Andy Warhol. And so you start talking about all these things and people don't know what you're talking about. And so you talk about American Transcendentalism, Ralph Waldo Emerson and David Thoreau and Emily Dickinson and Nathaniel Hawthorne. People don't know what you're talking about. And then if you get into Christian circles, they don't know the Bible. They don't know about the book of Jeremiah. They don't know about 2 Corinthians in the New Testament, Pauline theology. They don't know biblical theology. They don't know Old Testament theology. They don't know about Christology or the doctrine of God or the doctrines of sovereign free grace. They don't know what you're talking about. And so when you go to church, there's nothing to talk about except, well, hey, it's going to be a hot week. How's the corn doing? And you killed any chickens lately? So what do you talk about? And so we live these very superficial lives. We just sit around and talk about nothing, and then we go home and turn on the TV and read about Rome burning. That's life. So I don't know what I'm going to do this week. I got a psychologist, my appointment. I've been seeing him for about 3 or 4 years now. And the week will go by. I see him at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, which is nice. I don't like being outside in the afternoons. I don't like going anywhere in the afternoons. So that's it. That's my life. So I've been reading The Terrestrials by Paul West. Reading on the life of Patrick White by David Marr. Reading on the life of Christ. Reading Anthony Burgess, the very famous 17th century English Puritan, on John 17. Reading medieval commentators on the book of Jeremiah. Reading the Reformation commentary on Jeremiah. And that's why I read in the mornings. And reading on Square Haunting, 5 writers in London between the wars by Francisca Wade. The Bright Circle by Randall Fuller. Capitalism and Its Critics by John Cassidy. Free Speech. Tripping on Utopia by Benjamin Brin. I was reading yesterday when I read this is on Timothy Leary. I have a huge Timothy Leary collection. I think I've shown those over the years in my videos. I have Timothy Leary. So yeah. And as you all know, when I was in high school and I was into psychedelics, mushrooms, mescaline, LSD, and expanding consciousness. And now I just try to keep my eyes on Jesus as Rome is burning. So I hope you have a good reading week this week, and hope you have a good July. There's a lot of sadness. I'm not going to go into it. It's too depressing. So I'll sign off. I'll put these books back on my reading table in the living room, and I'll be reading The Life of Christ this morning, writing in my diary, watch some BookTube. My wife gets home late today because this is potluck Sunday. The first Sunday of the month they have a potluck. Everybody brings food to eat after the morning worship service, and my wife helps clean up, and so I won't see her until about 12:30 today. So once again, thank you for subscribing. Do pray you're all doing well, even though it's very tragic, especially what's going on in our country, climate. Anyway, I'm going to ramble. So until next time, may the Lord bless. Bye.